First of all, I'd like to welcome everybody tonight. And I sincerely appreciate the effort that everybody needs to be here, particularly our guest, or not our guest, he's our board, one of our board members who's going to speak in a few minutes. But glad everybody could make it. Everybody looks great. It's good to see some people can still fit in their uniforms. I can't. In fact, I tried on my G-suit the other day and I can't even get it around my legs. So thanks for being here. We've got, we're going to parade the colors here in just a second, so I'd like everybody to stand, and they'll win their way around up here. These are four of our cadets from the Texas Maritime Academy that we're very proud of here, and with that, parade the colors, gentlemen.
Color, hold, left, face, present, arms.
We will now do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, now the Texas.
Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee. One state, one indivisible, with liberty and
Order, arms,
All right, gentlemen, post the colors.
left wheel, arch. Color guard, hold, push. Cut. Order, arms. Right, face.
I got to tell you a story.
Thank you. Let us pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we're gathered here this evening when we give thanks we have the freedom to meet together for fellowship. May our friendships be strengthened and our lives be broadened. Bless this food to the nourishment of our bodies and us to thy loving service, and keep us ever mindful of the needs of others. We ask this in your name. Amen.
Amen.
All right, please be seated and bring on the chow. All right, we're going to get started here. Jerry tells me his speech runs about 3 hours and 15 minutes. I want to turn it over to Jeff Tyson here to do some presentations. Oh wait, before you do that, before I forget, I want to thank Judy Fisher, Don Dildy, and Will Fisher for all the work. Where's Don? Don, you're here. Come over here. There he is. Okay. I want to thank you for all the work putting this together. These things don't just happen. Folks have to really pay attention to what they're doing, and Judy, I think, kind of ran the show. So yeah, she cracked the whip. So thank you very much for putting this together. It's a super event. We appreciate it. Okay. Over to you there, Shipmate.
Okay, what most people are aware of, most of this area, but you may not be aware from other areas, is that in Texas, we have offshore racing. And offshore racing means you got to turn loose of the land and you got to go out there where you're not seeing land in any direction. And so there's a set of races called the Texas Offshore Racing Circuit. Okay, and it's comprised of, it was originally 4, it's now 3 races. And the winner of the series, meaning you've accumulated the least amount of points, I believe it's least point system, but you've accumulated the least points, meaning you've gotten the most 1s or the most 2s of anybody there, you win the overall Texas Offshore Racing Circuit. There's been a tradition since 1975. It was started with this cup right here. This is the Texas Navy Cup. This is the permanent club version. It's currently kept by the GBCA. It's the GBCA clubhouse here in Clear Lake. Okay. The Texas Navy Cup is awarded to the winner of the Texas Offshore Racing Circuit. And so I'd like to call that individual up here. Jeff Kitterman is the skipper of the 2011 Offshore Racing Circuit winner. Congratulations, Skipper. Thank you, Skipper. We have one other tradition for the skipper of the winning boat for the Texas Offshore Racing Circuit. Keep in mind, these are the best skippers in the state of Texas in ocean racing. We have one other tradition, and that's that the skipper gets an Admiral's commission. Admiral Kitterman. Let me read this to those of you who haven't seen this before. It says, "The state of Texas, to all whom these presents shall come, greetings. Know ye that Jeff Kitterman is hereby commissioned an Admiral in the Texas Navy, with all rights and privileges appertaining thereto, and with the duty of assisting in the preservation of the history, boundaries, water resources, and civil defense of the state. In testimony whereof, I have hereunto signed my name, and caused the seal of the state of Texas to be affixed at the city of Austin this 21st day of November, AD 2011, Rick Perry, Governor of Texas." Congratulations. Admiral here to bring his 2 co-skippers up real quickly, because we have a little something more. So I can take that. Okay.
Yeah, the name of our boat is Tres Hombres because there's actually 3 of us.
They're all hombres.
The name of our boat is Tres Hombres because there's 3 partners in this boat. Steve, I just happen to steer the boat. Steve tells me where to go. Mike trims the sails, and we're actually a team. We can't win without each other. So these are my partners here on Tres Hombres, and if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be holding this.
These are both identical certificates, and I'm going to read Mike Tyer's. It says, "The Texas Navy Association, to all to whom these presents shall come, greetings. Know ye that Michael Tyer is a duly commissioned and appointed commander in the Texas Navy by the authority of the Texas Navy Association as of December 2nd, 2011, with all the rights and privileges appertaining thereto, and with the duty of supporting the Texas Navy's mission and assisting with its activities to preserve, protect, and promote the history of the Texas Navy. Signed, Admiral William Packavance, President, and Admiral William Turner, Vice President." Congratulations, Mike. Gentlemen, we have one other thing for you, and that's a 1-year membership in the Texas Navy Association.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
This is how we hook you.
Skipper?
Is that right, Jenny?
That's it. That's a good one.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Congratulations.
We're honored to be here.
Okay. Should we we, since it's gonna take 3 hours and 15 minutes, we give folks a break or just go right into it. You have to get up and go ahead, Phil, I'm sure the commissioner wouldn't mind. Well, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce JP, who really needs Jerry Patterson, who really needs no introduction in this crowd. He's well known. He's a Marine aviator extraordinaire, and we call it naval aviation. And he's a F4 driver. That's a great jet. That's a great jet. And we're happy. He was a senator for the state. He's been land commissioner since. He was just reelected in 2010, I believe. And he's on our board, and he's done so much to help us through some fairly turbulent times. And he's here with Susan. Thank you for being here, Judge. It's good to see you. And we really appreciate Jerry coming over here. They left about 3 o'clock in Austin and beat feet over, and that's a lot of work. Jerry gets around the state a lot. So Jerry, thank you very much for being here. We're very proud. Colonel.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Admiral. I'm always nervous when I'm around people that had stars on their shoulders at one time or another. I started in the Marine Corps. I was there, 24 years active in reserve, and I learned in my service that my attitude was that a letter of reprimand was better than no mail at all. And I had
I've got a feeling mine.
mail call. Okay, it's me again. Letter of reprimand. Here you go. Thank you, Skipper. I appreciate it very much. Now, I'm not going to talk 3 hours and 15 minutes. I'm just going to talk until I can tell when people want me to quit. Now, there's signs that are indicative of that. Face down into your woman in the leg. That's an early sign it's time to quit. When there's nobody there, it's probably time to quit. And I'm also just kind of bounce around a little bit. You would think that this is the Christmas party of the Texas Navy Association, so therefore I should talk about the Texas Navy. Well, I'm smarter than that, because there's no way you're going to go to any kind of association or group or legacy group, whatever it is, and talk about the subject matter over which these people have been formed and are knowledgeable about. So I'm not talking about the Texas Navy, because everybody in here is probably far more expert than I am. I will mention, if you haven't gone to the back of the room there and looked at some of the items from Admiral Moore, and then the things that I hastily put together, made copies of documents at the General Land Office. We can't take the real documents out of the Land Office about members of the Texas Navy who applied for land and did not receive it because Sam Houston was on the other side of the dispute whether Texas Navy service was entitled to land. There's a lot of history back here. If you have a cell phone, I'd recommend you leave it on. It might be the most entertaining thing that happens in the next 15 minutes. But I would remind you, though, I am your speaker, and my job is to speak, and your job is to listen. But if you get finished before I do, that's okay. And Diane, thank you for that blessing. I was relieved that it was not a Baptist blessing, or we'd still be I'm glad that you're not a Baptist. But that's okay. I'm not against Baptist at all, but for those of you that are nautical, and for those of you that like to maybe fish when you're out there on the waters, you know that rule about you never, if you go fishing, never take just one Baptist, always take two. If you take one, he's going to drink all your beer. If you take two, they ain't drinking any. And as a backslidden Baptist, I can proudly state that I've been in both of those circumstances. And now that I'm a Lutheran, I don't have to worry about it. And Admiral, thank you for the introduction again. I am a Marine. I'm a retired Marine. My son is a Marine major. He's the 5th consecutive generation of our family to have served overseas in time of war. He's currently on his 4th deployment. Marines are kind of different. They get on a boat. The boat leaves. The boat goes somewhere, and they get off. So I don't know where he's going, but he's left on his 4th deployment from San Diego. He's a Cobra pilot. He flies Cobras. And I I'm always reminded that that admonishment or that statement that you can always tell a Marine, but you can't tell him much. And so we're going to try to live up to that. I want to talk about Texas history. And one of the things, it is a humorous story somebody asked me to talk about. I've told it several times. But what the Admiral did not mention is that I was in the legislature for 6 years, from 1993 to 1999 inclusive. And I was probably best known, famous, infamous, notorious, whatever you want to call it, as the author of Senate Bill 60, which is the Texas Concealed Handgun Law. To get a quick show of hands of those of you that since we passed the bill have been involved in a shootout at a four-way stop. But I make light of that, but if you recall, in 1993 when we first passed it and Governor Richards vetoed it, and in part that was why she was no longer governor after the 93 election. But we did pass it finally in 95 and Governor Bush signed it. But if you recall, every newspaper in the state of Texas, every single daily newspaper said that if we passed this law, this concealed handgun law, that it was going to be blood in the streets, wild, wild west, shootouts at every four-way stop. In fact, the San Antonio Express News actually specifically named me and said, Senator Patterson, you will be personally liable and responsible for the blood that flows in the state of Texas. Oh, I didn't give a damn, frankly. All I knew was the blood from the wrong side of the law wouldn't bother me at all, And none of that happened. I mean, you recall, every single, it was supposed to be, none of that happened. And the statistical measures, which is crime per 100,000 population, assaultive crime, firearm violence, if you do the data, and this is federal data, it's easy to find, DPS data, those who have a concealed handgun license are 5 times less likely to be involved in any kind of offense than those who don't. And it just makes sense. But that's the issue that I've kind of been noted for, and I love to tell the story. This is a true story. Anytime a politician starts out by saying this is a true story, you wonder about all the other stuff. But nonetheless, this is a true story. In 1993, as I mentioned, I passed the concealed handgun law. Governor Richards vetoed it. And then in 1995, we passed it by vote in a Democratic district and not a Republican, but that doesn't make any difference. We've got good people in both parties, and we were talking about one from Galveston, Craig Island, representing Craig Island. But I was elected with very minimal margin. And then I was in my first session, and then redistricting made my district even more leaning to the other party. I was referred to as dead meat Patterson, nice guy, but he ain't coming back. So, and a gentleman who ran against me was a very well-known, articulate, 2-time House member who had been Texas Monthly's 10 best members of the legislature in both of his sessions, and I was, not going to make it. But my son, who had graduated from high school in June of 1994, had joined the Marine Corps. And it was on June 6, 1994, that the recruiter was going to pick him up, take him to the airport, and send him off to boot camp. So I didn't go to work that morning. I went out to run instead. I used to be a runner, but I waited till late in the day, and it was real damn hot. And I thought, well, that was stupid. I got back to the house, I'm about to have a heat stroke, and I'm standing out there in the yard. I got these little red running shorts on, and these little white running shoes, and I took my shirt off, and I'm wiping my brow, and I leaned up on the truck like this, thinking, oh, I'm about to have a heat stroke, and I hear this noise. Halt! Stop! Help me catch him! He robbed the bank. And I looked around, and this guy running down the street jumps across my yard, runs diagonally, jumps between my house and the neighbor's house over my back fence, and then a guy pulls up in a private vehicle who was in an HPD uniform, Houston Police uniform, says, I'm the security guard at Texas Commerce Bank, help me catch a guy who robbed the bank. So I said, okay, and figured I ran in the house, and I had deduced fairly soon that if he had robbed the bank, he probably had not talked them out of the money so that he might be armed. And so I ran in and I grabbed my cell phone and my assault weapon. And it was an assault weapon only because, it contained more than one bullet. Because in the definition of assault weapon, anything carries more than one bullet. So I ran out, told my son what was going on, ran out in the backyard. Being a former Marine, I did a quick analysis of the terrain and situation, and I seized the high ground by leaping up on the barbecue pit. On the barbecue pit. Little red running shorts, white shoes. It was actually a Ruger P89 stainless steel semi-automatic handgun, cell phone. And the cop is over there on the next street, and I am screaming at him back and forth, trying to describe to the police officer the color of the trim of the house where the perpetrator is located. And so he hollers back at me, he says, "Call 911, I don't have a radio." So I called 911 and tell them who it was. I'm a senator, you know. And there's a bank robber right over here, and we kind of got him cornered. And then y'all send somebody. And so pretty soon, we had people come to my house, and we had 4 Houston police officer units, you know, patrol vehicles. We had 2 constables, 3 sheriffs, a helicopter overhead, and 4 record drivers showed up. This is a big crowd, you know, and so I'm on the backyard, you know, little red running shorts, handgun, cell phone, little white shoes, and the first cop walks in my backyard and sees me with a gun on the barbecue pit. And we have a conversation, you know, and I explained to him who I was, and he says, apparently the helicopter overhead radios down to him, patches through or something like that, and says, "Who is the semi-naked man on the barbecue pit with the handgun?" And the cop says, "You won't believe it, but he says he's a senator." My only regret was that, you know, we caught the guy. It was a 17-year-old kid who robbed the bank with a BB pistol. But you don't know that. But anyway, we caught the guy. My only regret was I was not able to draw down on the modified Weaver stance and say, "Halt, Texas legislature." Can you think of anything that would scare the crap out of anybody? An armed member of the legislature in the immediate vicinity? The story doesn't stop there. I'm on the barbecue pit. I get a phone call on my cell phone, and my campaign manager says, "You got to get down here now." What's wrong? "You have to sign these checks. They're going to cut the phones off. They're going to kick us out of the campaign office. You got to do that now." I said, "I can't." He said, "Why not?" I said, "I'm on a barbecue pit." He says, "What?" And I explained to him what happened. He didn't say, "Are you hurt? Can I send help?" He said, "Great," and hangs up on me. And I'm thinking, what the hell was that about? So pretty soon, you know, in my house shows up Channel 11, Channel 13. And I got on the next day's Chronicle in the Metro section above the fold, right there is me standing on a barbecue pit with a handgun and a cell phone, but I put some clothes on. And my opponent in that election to this day swears that we set that up. Anyway, that's a true story. I mean, it really is. And I've had a lot of fun with that issue, but I want to talk a little bit about history. There's a lot of things about history in Texas history, and I'm one of those that says you don't need daytime drama. You don't need Sex in the City. You don't need any of the things that sizzle and titillate or whatever you want to call that today. You just read about Texas history because it's all there. I don't care, whatever it is. Drama, violence, you know, heeing and sheeing, whatever you want to call that. Everything is there. And I'm going to start out by talking about one of my predecessors. You know, I'm the 27th Commissioner of the Texas General Land Office. It's the oldest statewide elected official in Texas. We've had a land commissioner longer than we've had a governor. But the guy that I'll talk about first is the second commissioner of the land office. His name was Pegleg Warren. He was from Ireland, came over to Nova Scotia, ended up in New Orleans, and joined the New Orleans Grays, and in 1835 showed up in Texas to fight for Texas independence, like many other young men who were recruited to make their way westward. And he shows up. He's in the Battle of Bayard, San Antonio de Bayard, in December of 1835, and he has his leg blown off by a Mexican cannonball. Ergo, peg leg. He recuperates. He now finds himself in the capital of Texas, which at that time was the city of Houston, right up the road here for a brief while. And having been trained in Ireland as a contractor and a constructor kind of guy, he's contracted to build the capital of the republic down there on, I think it was, where the Rice Hotel is, or the Rice Lofts are now. He's contracted to build that building. He's a real type A personality, though. And he demands, he's a type A guy. He gets into a dispute with a member of Congress of the Republic of Texas. And Pegleg demands satisfaction. He challenges the gentleman to a duel. and they go out in the streets of Houston. And dueling was becoming a little passé. This was about 37 or 38, I think. Dueling was becoming passé, but nonetheless, Peg Leg being the type A guy demands a duel. They go out there, they're back to back, they pace off, they turn and fire, and they both miss. Desirable outcome. Dueling was not necessarily to kill your antagonist, it was just to prove that you would demand satisfaction. Peg Leg, being a type A guy, demands a rematch. So they go back out in the street, back to back, pace off, turn and fire. And if you recall that song from Johnny Cash, A Boy Named Sue, where he, tumbled in the mud, the blood, and the beer, that's what happened to Peg Leg. He goes down. Boom. Crowd runs over to see what had happened. The lead ball had impacted his wooden leg and made it inoperable. He could not make another demand for a rematch. Well, if you go about 2 more years down the road, this would be 39, maybe 40. Peg Leg is now in a town that was formerly known as Waterloo, that we now know as Austin. Some say the People's Republic of Austin. Some say 90 square miles surrounded by reality, but nonetheless. 1930 or 1839, Peg Leg is in Austin, and he is now the mayor of Austin, suggesting that the talent pool in Texas was not that deep at the time. And they're having a great celebration on 21 April of 39 over the great victory over San Jacinto, over Santa Ana. They were having a big deal, and things were different then. Today we would have barbecue cook-offs. We would have parades. We'd have a beauty contest. We might have a laser light show in a downtown building. But back then, what they did was they had speeches, orations. Each speaker might talk for an hour, and the crowd would drink whiskey. They would, fire their weapons in the air, in the dirt, into each other. And during all this going on, they loaded the cannon apparently 2 or 3 times with powder, no ball. I mean, one of these deals where, did you load it? No, I better go do that. And so he loaded again, ram a charge down there, and then somebody come along who was actually supposed to load the cannon, they ram a charge down there. Peg Leg is the mayor. He hobbles over at the end of all the speeches to fire the cannon, does so, it explodes and takes off his arm. Got 1 leg and 1 arm remaining. And he was thereafter appointed by Sam Houston to fill the vacancy by the former commissioner, a guy named John Borden, who had resigned in kind of in disgust because the things were such interesting, they were very, very disheveled records at the land office. And he becomes land commissioner, Peg Leg does, replacing Borden. By the way, Borden's brother was Gail Borden. Gail Borden went back to New York after the Battle of San Jacinto, which they both participated, went in the milk business, B-O-R-D-E-N. But so Ward becomes commissioner, does a really good job. But then he's got this type A side, which means he's not really a good person to be married to. And so he's involved at a time in a very nasty divorce. This book is out, it's about 3 years, it's been out about 3 years, titled Peg Leg. If you're interested in Austin history, Texas history, or just old, pretty entertaining stories, you ought to get it titled Peg Leg. But anyway, he's involved at a time when people didn't get divorced. People didn't get divorced in the 1840s and 50s and 60s because you didn't need to. If you didn't like the SOB you're living with, just wait, because one of you's going to die. You had cholera, yellow fever, Indians, the Mexican army. There was no need for divorce because there was a high turnover. Not like today. So Peg Leg is involved in a very nasty divorce simultaneously in 2 states, New York and Texas. It lasted for about 15 years. It's a fascinating story and I highly recommend it. We have a lot of interesting characters that have served Texas. One of my favorites is another character, and I'm not in any chronological order here, but another favorite character of mine is a former governor. And before I tell that, since we're in Galveston, I'll tell the story about the Tidelands. How many people, I'm sure all of y'all know that Texas is unique in our coastal sovereignty. Texas has a sovereignty in the Gulf of Mexico of 3 marine leagues, which is 9 nautical miles, which is 10.36 statute miles. And that's very unique. There is no other coastal state that has a sovereignty outside of 3 nautical miles, except for Florida, which has the 3-league sovereignty on the Gulf side as a result of the Tidelands dispute about what I'm about to describe. This goes back to 1840, we'll say 1845. We came in the Union uniquely We came in the Union not by an annexation of a territory. We came in the Union by a treaty between two sovereign nations, ratified by the Congress of both of those nations. Our real estate guy in the transaction was Sam Houston, and he insisted that our boundaries as a state be the same as they were as a republic. And at that time, we had a panhandle that went all the way up to Wyoming, and east of the Rio Grande, all the way bisected New Mexico, and of course we claimed 3 leagues in the Gulf of Mexico. Sam insisted that be the boundaries. Nobody cared. So what? We came in, ratified treaty, annexation treaty between two sovereign nations. We later sold the panhandle that went to Wyoming, became that iconic shape that identifies Texas today, but we still had 9 nautical miles in the Gulf of Mexico, and who cares? Well, in the 1940s, 30s, and 40s, the reality of production of oil and gas from submerged lands came to pass. And the oil companies, recognizing that Texas charged a higher bonus royalty for exploration on submerged land than the federal government did. I don't remember what the number was, but it was probably something like 25 cents an acre if you were, if it was federal lands, and $1 an acre if it was state lands. The oil companies start this movement, and they're successful. So the Supreme Court in the 1940s rules that Texas and other coastal states do not own these submerged lands. And of course, this was when there was a lot of revenue that was going to be coming in. This was not well received in Texas. There were secession conventions held around the state, led by the land commissioner, Bascom Giles, who later went to prison for land fraud. Makes sense. And an obscure state senator named Alan Shivers, who was from East Texas, but married into a wealthy family, the Sherry family from down in the Rio Grande Valley. And Shivers became a one-note Johnny. I mean, he was running around clamoring for return of the tidelands, 2.5 million acres submerged in the Gulf of Mexico. Big deal. Bills passed in Congress to restore the tidelands to Texas and other coastal states. They were vetoed by Roosevelt, and I believe another one passed, which was subsequently vetoed by Truman. We weren't doing very well in recovery of this asset. It was a big deal. And the dispute lasted up into the 60s, and I remember my parents talking about it angrily in the 50s. I can remember, I'm 65 years old, I can remember my parents talking when I'm riding around in a car. I remember standing up in the back seat, you did that back then, angry about the tidelands. So we weren't doing very well. Well, in 1948, we elected a governor. That's a real governor. That's not a character in the Dukes of Hazzard. And the lieutenant governor we elected was Alan Shivers, who'd been, lobbying and working hard for recovery of the tidelands unsuccessfully for about 10 years. Well, interesting thing, Jester had been a railroad commissioner. He was a regent at the University of Texas. If you went to the University of Texas, you're familiar with Jester Hall. And he moved into the mansion. Do we have any members of the Jester family here? Okay. Well, Jester moves into the mansion in Austin, unaccompanied by the family that remained in Corsicana. It was widely known but not reported that the governor had a paramour substantially younger than he, who traveled with him on many occasions. The governor was a kind of a party animal. He liked to eat, he liked to drink, he was kind of a get down kind of guy, And in 1949, in July the 11th, I think, 1949, and the politicos traveled by train back then on a train trip to Galveston from Austin with this young lady during an episode of what can best be described as intense physical activity. The governor has a heart attack and dies on the train. The train stops, the young lady's disembarked. She's driven back to Austin. The train proceeds on to Houston, where the governor's body is discovered by a gentleman named Frank Hammer, H-A-M-E-R, Hammer, who was a retired Texas Ranger, and coincidentally the same Ranger that led the ambush of Bonnie and Clyde in Livonia, Louisiana, about 10 years before. So, as a result of you may be wondering what this has to do with the tidelands. As a result of the governor's untimely demise, Alan Shivers, one-note Johnny, tidelands, he's elevated to governor. He's reelected in his own right in 50. Terms were 2 years back then. He's up again in 52. We still haven't recovered the tidelands. And, of course, everyone in Texas was a member of the Democrat Party. There were no Republicans to speak of. And of course, this presidential election year in '52, of course, the governor of Texas, Democrat governor of Texas, was obviously going to support the Democrat nominee for president, Adlai Stevenson. I mean, you know, what else would you do? Well, Alan Shivers, still focused on the Tidelands, in a moment of political courage, doing something very unique and unheard of, putting your state above your party.
No.
He calls up Adlai Stevenson and says, I think he was a senator. Stevenson was a senator of Illinois, I believe. He says, Senator Stevenson, when you're president and that bill passes to restore the Tidelands, will you sign it? Restore the Tidelands to Texas. And Stevenson says, no, I will not. So Shivers calls up Eisenhower, asking the same question. Dwight Eisenhower, Republican nominee. Eisenhower says, yes, I will sign the bill. You know, that was the deal. And the federal government has entirely too much wealth and power, and I will sign the deal. As a result of that, Governor Shivers endorses and campaigns for Governor Shivers, the Democrat governor of Texas, for the Republican nominee for president, Dwight David Eisenhower, openly and aggressively. Eisenhower carries Texas, first time a Republican had done that since Reconstruction, I think. Becomes president, sworn in 1953, and in '53 signs the legislation restoring the Tidelands to Texas, which has generated about $6 billion in royalty income for the Perma School Fund. All of that because of a train ride that did not go according to plan. One more story and I'll quit. I love Texas history. We've had a lot of characters in public office. We still have a lot of characters in public office. My favorite governor, though, my favorite gubernatorial quote, if you will, was from a lady governor. Now, y'all remember Ann Richards. She was colorful and she was really kind of fun to be around. I like Ann Richards. We were different parties and we were served at the same time. But I'm not talking about Ann Richards. I'm talking about our first lady governor. Our first lady governor was a lady named Ma Ferguson. Her initials were M.A., conveniently. Goes right into Ma very easily. And she was married to a guy named James E. They called him Paul Ferguson, who was governor until in 1919 when he was impeached, convicted, and removed from office for selling pardons, for vetoing the appropriation at the University of Texas, and also for depositing money in his bank at a much lower interest, state dollars in his bank at a much lower interest. He was impeached, removed from office, could never run for office again. So in 1922, unbeknownst to Ma Ferguson, Paul Ferguson announces that Ma Ferguson is running for governor. So being a good trooper that she is, she gets in there. Her campaign slogan is Ma and Paul Ferguson, two governors for the price of one. And she gets in a runoff in the Democrat primary with a guy named Felix H. Robertson, who was the Ku Klux Klan candidate. She beats him in a runoff and is now governor. So back then we had an issue, same issue as what we have today. And there are no new public policy issues in my opinion. They're just different names, different times, different players. Today we have an issue about children who are primary Spanish speakers and how do we educate them. Today we'll use terms. We'll say, do we use the immersion method or do we use the bilingual method? Back then they had the same problem. They said, do we teach them in English or do we teach them in Spanish? Paul Ferguson was asked that question by the press in a conference or in some event, and she responded about what I believe the most infamous quote in Texas political history when she said, when asked about how do we teach children who are primary Spanish speakers, she said, if English was good enough for Jesus Christ. It's good enough for the school children of Texas. I think it's time to maybe party and dance a little more. We appreciate y'all coming to our Christmas party. We appreciate your interest in helping us all preserve the history of the Texas Navy, which is something that's little known to most Texans. It can only be a good thing if you help us let more folks know about the Texas Navy, the Texas history, and our legacy we share as Texans, whether you were born here or not. You're Texans. We appreciate it. God bless you, and God bless Texas.
Now, I'm not going to try to say anything after that. Merry Christmas, and let's get on with the festivities. Thank you all for being here tonight. Have fun.
Good job.